just a little bit about yourself. Megan, why don't you start?
Yeah, I can kick us off. My name is Megan Martin. I'm currently a sophomore at Penn State, obviously, and I'm intending a finance major as well as an information sciences and technology minor. I'm really excited to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you. Sarah?
Hello, my name is Sarah Hunt. I'm an actuarial science major with minors in math and statistics. And like Megan, I'm also very excited to be here.
Wonderful. You look excited. We appreciate that. Kyle?
Nice to meet you guys. My name is Kyle Kroboth. I am actually in the third year of a 5-year program here at Penn State called the BS MBA program. So next fall, I'm actually going to be starting on my MBA, which I'm really excited about. But I concentrate in statistics in the undergrad. So like everybody else, very excited.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Kayla?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Esanison, and I'm studying Management Information Systems with a minor in Spanish. I'm graduating in the spring, so it's super exciting. It's my last competition, so I'm glad it's IBEC, and I'm very excited.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Kayla. Anna? Anna or Anna?
Anna.
Anna. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Shimmick. I'm the only member of our team who attended IBEC last year. Jim, I don't know if you remember, you were also our Uber judge last year when we talked about Google in the corporate town. So it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
I'm currently a junior studying management information systems with a minor in business law. And I am really excited to be back at IBEC for a second year. And I am really excited about what our case is this year as well. So looking forward to presenting.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It's always great to see when people come back to IBEC for another competition. And we really do appreciate that. Now let's have our judges introduce themselves to you. Tina, would you like to lead off?
Sure. I'm Tina Sheldon, and by background, I'm a nurse and an attorney. And I have served in senior compliance officer roles for over 20 years in both healthcare and higher education in for-profit, nonprofit, public, and private institutions. I'm also on the advisory board of the Hoffman Center for Business Ethics, and I have had the pleasure of judging this competition for the past several years and have really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jeff?
My name is Jeff Cable. I am in Santa Clarita, California, about 40 minutes north of Los Angeles. I work at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I helped establish their ethics office 16, 17 years ago, I guess now. In the last several years, I've transitioned out of that office into our content management program, and I focus on ethical use of data, data privacy, and data security.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. Tom?
Hi, everybody. Like the students, I'm very excited to be here. My background is in corporate America. I worked for a medical products company as a senior executive in Boston. Retired a couple of years ago, and I'm doing some volunteer stuff here in Atlanta. And I'm probably the only guy in IBEC who went to school with Tom White. We were classmates in high school. So it's good to be a part of this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much to judges. I'm going to read a paragraph to you, and this is something that is not going to come as a surprise. It is something that has been on our website. I'm sure Anna has read it more times than anybody. And we just like to read this so that before every presentation, so that everybody, all the teams have the same information. So I'll read that now. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to us, the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem, and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. If you hit 25 minutes, I will go like this and show you 5, meaning that you have 5 minutes left. During this time, the teams will be uninterrupted. And when you are finished, we are going to ask you questions for about 20 minutes. Now, during that period, we're all going to stay in character. You're going to stay as the consultants. We are going to stay as the committee, the NFL Executive Committee, and Roger Goodall. And we're going to give you feedback outside of the role playing after that. After that, we are going to back away from our roles and just become who we are and give you some feedback on your presentation. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. Also, a weakness would be simply reading directly from a script. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. And then finally, when you speak, we'd appreciate if you would look into your webcam so that we can make eye contact with you. I know that that can be a little difficult in Zoom because we're all accustomed to looking at the screen and thinking that maybe we're making eye contact with the other people when we're really not. So we really appreciate your looking into the webcam. We are, in this situation, we are the NFL Executive Committee. And then we're Roger Goodall. We're all collectively Roger Goodall, the commissioner. And you are a consulting firm, I believe, the SMEEK consulting firm. And you are going to be helping us with our situation that we have today. Does anybody have any questions before we get started, especially the team? Are you set to go?
Yes, I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint right now.
Okay, Sabrina will watch here. And by the way, I don't want to embarrass Sabrina, but just to say that she is our tech expert for today, and we could not exist without our tech experts. So Sabrina, thank you very much. Okay, now once again, I want to welcome you to IBEC. It's a pleasure to have you here, and please start whenever you are ready.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, NFL Executive Committee. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us regarding this pressing ethical issue. In the past 2 months alone, the NFL has faced numerous lawsuits associated with discrimination in its hiring practices. One of these lawsuits involving Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores, which we deem unacceptable. Throughout this meeting, we will analyze your current hiring practices and see if there is alignment with who you are as a league, and if not, see if this is a much deeper racial issue that needs to be addressed in order to promote what you live by. We are SMAC Consulting. My name is Kayla E. Sanderson, and I am a Senior Management Information Systems major at Penn State University. I am joined by my colleague, Sarah Hunt, a sophomore actuarial science major, Kyle Kroboth, a junior BS-MBA candidate in statistics, Megan Martin, a sophomore finance major, and Anna Shimmick, a junior studying management information systems. This is our agenda for today's meeting. As you can see here, we will start off by looking at the current state of racial diversity in the NFL to help establish our problem statement and to see who will be affected if there is any racial inequalities present. Then we'll move to discussing who the NFL is at its core and introducing our main objectives to offset the problem we identified regarding hiring process in the NFL. Next, we will share the plan that we have developed to combat these problems with the help of a use case so you can all get the full picture of what this will entail. And in this, we will also look at our implementation timeline, what success of this program will look like, and the legal and financial implications of implementing this program. Finally, we will end this meeting by giving a summary of what was discussed. So at this time, I would like to pass it off to Megan to begin this dive into the problem at hand.
Thank you, Kayla. Like she mentioned, recent lawsuits have sparked conversation about the NFL. In fact, a Google search on the organization will lead you to countless headlines noting upon the current state of diversity within the NFL. NFL under fire over failure to address inequality within the league, or Black NFL coaches have never been more poorly represented than they are now, are just some of the headlines you'll find. Our team recognizes that you didn't hire us to simply appease the upset public's perception of what is going on. So to address this, we went out to determine if there is actually a gap between the current state of diversity in the NFL and the ideal state, as many of the headlines allude to. So we first established a problem statement. The first question we addressed was, 1, do inequalities exist in the NFL? So do we notice the unequal or unjust distribution of opportunities between people of color and white people within the league? If so, 2, are those inequalities that exist problematic? So are there people or groups of people that experience less opportunity because of the imbalance? If that exists as well, 3, what is the most effective or the best way to navigate addressing these inequalities? To answer these questions, we sought out the NFL Diversity and Inclusion Report from 2021. The report looks into whether ethnic minorities face occupational access barriers to positions within the NFL. First, let's take a look at the chart on the left side of the screen, which shows the makeup of the 41 new hires during the 2020 to 2021 season within the general manager, head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator positions. The color red represents men of color, and the color blue represents white men. You'll notice that 34%, or 14 of the 41 total new hires, were men of color, whereas 66%, or 27 individuals, were white men that were newly hired. Similarly, the chart on the right shows more of a complete picture of the situation. It doesn't only show individuals that were hired during the 2020 to 2021 season, but it shows everyone that holds one of those 4 positions. And we found that overall, there are 3.88 times as many white men as men of color working in those positions. So the NFL is basically saying, yes, there is a disparity in the league between people of color and white men. So we then went on to address our second piece of the problem statement. If inequality exists, is it problematic? We did so by considering the stakeholders of the situation. We focused on where the value due to the current situation was being extracted. Players, coaches and staff, teams, minority job candidates, fans, and the sports community in general are all affected by the inequalities in the NFL. Value is extracted from the teams, for example, as less representation can negatively affect cohesiveness and unity of a team. Also, prospective job candidates don't have as much of a chance if diversity is not a priority for the league. We then took a look at the mission, responsibilities, and the core values of the NFL, which directly contributed to how we plan to address said inequalities, which Anna will talk more about.
Thank you, Megan. So to determine how the NFL should proceed in this situation, we first looked at your mission, your responsibility, and your core values. This is how you define yourselves and how you say you would like to act within your actions. So today we're going to be focusing specifically on your core values as well as your overall culture. So an ethical culture is formed from formal and informal processes, which are influenced by a company's overall values. We can see your values here are respect, integrity, responsibility to team, and resiliency. But we're seeing a misalignment between your actions and your formal and informal processes and your values, which is leading to an overall unethical culture. We want to realign your actions and processes with your values to create an ethical culture within the NFL. So to do this, we started by setting 2 overarching objectives. The first is to increase the pool of qualified minority candidates within the NFL coaching staff. And the second is, once those minority candidates are in the NFL, to increase equity in league promotions. So we're going to start by looking at the first piece. And to do that, we're going to look at what the NFL, you, are already doing in order to address this first piece. So the Rooney Rule encourages hiring best practices in order to foster and provide opportunity to diverse leadership throughout the NFL. The Rooney Rule was established in 2003 and with a goal of increasing diversity within the league. The Rooney Rule was that teams with a head coaching vacancy were required to interview at least one or more diverse candidates before making a new hire for that position. Over time, it was seen that this initial change was not enough. So there was updates made in order to try to, again, rectify these racial inequalities. In 2021, the requirement was that every team must interview at least 2 external minority candidates for an open head coaching position. As Kayla mentioned earlier, this is what sparked the Brian Flores lawsuit. Brian Flores was applying for a head coaching position, and before he even had his interview, it was made known to him that the job had already been given to someone else, but still with the intent of interviewing him in order to meet the Rooney Rule. So teams are finding loopholes in order to meet this requirement, but still hire a candidate that often is not a minority. So most recently, in March of 2022, the first actual mandate to the Rooney Rule was created that requires all 32 teams to hire a minority offensive assistant coach for the 2022 season. So to talk a little bit more about this and how it creates a pipeline to head coaching positions, I'm going to pass things off to Kyle.
Thanks, Anna. Now we're going to go into a bit more detail on the new mandate part of the Rooney Rule, which states that all 32 teams are required to hire a minority offensive assistant coach for the 2022 season. To the right, we have a diagram that shows the status quo for diversity in NFL coaching. The bottom row is coaches in entry-level analyst roles, which feeds up into position coaches, then to coordinators, and finally to the head coach at the very top. As you can see, there's a limited pool for diverse promotions because there aren't that many diverse candidates to choose from at the entry level. In this diagram, that's only 1 out of 6. We address this ongoing problem with the new changes to the Rooney Rule. Having more minorities in entry-level positions increases the proportion of diverse candidates in the overall pool and makes it more likely that a minority person of color will be the best fit and the most qualified for the position. As time passes, we can expect this cycle to continue up through the ranks until minority representation has improved at all levels of NFL coaching staffs. We would also like to emphasize that the new rule addresses inequality where it is most prominent on the offensive side of the ball. In 2021, only 21% of offensive coordinators were minorities, compared to 36% of defensive coordinators. This has a substantial impact on head coaching diversity, as 60% of current head coaches come from an offensive coaching background. By introducing more minority candidates in the offensive coaching pool, we address this problem. As we mentioned, the Rooney Rule has already been ratified by you, but it's important that we don't stop there. So now we're going to transition into our recommendations. You may be wondering, if we've already addressed the problem with the Rooney Rule, why do we have to do anything else? And the answer is that even whenever they're in the same positions, minorities are still faced with systemic disadvantages compared to white candidates. Take the following situation, where a hiring manager is comparing candidate A, a white man, to candidate B, a black man. Maybe the hiring manager thinks to themselves, candidate B is qualified, but I've worked with candidate A, and my colleagues give him great recommendations. Or maybe they even just think, candidate B is qualified, but candidate A, you know what? He just looks like the best man for the job. The first quote is an example of the differences in opportunity for minority candidates. The second is an example of implicit bias in decision-making. Both of these problems are addressed in the 3-part solution that Anna is going to overview for you now.
Thanks, Kyle. So as Kyle mentioned, the first one of our objectives is currently being addressed by you, the NFL. So our 3-piece recommendation looks to address that second objective of increasing equity in league promotions. So as Kyle mentioned, our recommendation is 3 pieces. The first is a diversity education conference, which aims to educate upper-level executives on the positives of having diversity within coaching and staff, as well as providing networking opportunities for minority candidates. The second is what we like to call our championship program. It's a career sponsorship program specifically for minorities and coaching staffs in the league that is internal to teams, and again, helps minority candidates build that network to be able to move up in the NFL. Finally, we have some changes to the hiring process, specifically the implementation of a standardized scorecard and recording interviews to increase visibility and input. All of these are formal process changes that we'll go more into detail with our implementation. But for now, we want to look at the impact that this has on your culture and your ethics. So as I mentioned, these are all formal process changes. As I mentioned previously, an ethical culture is made up of ethical formal processes and ethical informal processes, all underpinned by your values. The current misalignment that exists is problematic, and our recommendation seeks to rectify that by creating formal process changes that will then influence the informal culture change, which manifests in norms of daily behavior, myths and stories, language, and role models. Improvements to both these formal and informal systems will help to create a strong ethical culture that is in alignment with your values we discussed earlier of respect, integrity, responsibility to team, and resiliency. So to go a little bit more into detail and talk about our use case for our recommendations, I'm going to pass things off to Sarah.
Thank you, Anna. As we detail our implementation process, we will be offering a glimpse of how our recommendation would look in action with this use case. So for this case, consider Saquon Barkley, a Penn State graduate and running back for the New York Giants. After his career as a player, Saquon has the goal to become an NFL coach. How do our recommendations help Saquon to achieve his goal? As Kyle talked about before, getting a foot in the door is a major piece to initially receiving a position within the NFL. Saquon has a few factors at play to help him get his foot in the door as a minority candidate. So one, Saquon has played an offensive position in the NFL. So he has gained the qualifications and leadership skills and industry knowledge from his experience. But two, he also has the 2022 Rooney Rule update, which requires that all 32 teams hire a minority candidate to the assistant offensive coordinator position. This pushes Saquon's consideration forward, and ultimately he is able to receive the offensive assistant coaching position. I'll now pass it back over to Anna to begin detailing the solution's actions towards increasing equity in league promotions.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to talk about the first piece of our recommendation, which is the NFL Diversity Conference, which again aims to increase equity in league promotions. As I mentioned earlier, there's two main goals of this conference. The first is to educate, and the second is to provide networking opportunities. So we have some more specifics here about what that would look like. So for the attendees, it would be mandatory attendance for front office reps for all 32 teams to ensure that all the teams in the league are getting this education. And they would go through diversity and implicit bias training in order to help them better learn about the importance of diversity in the workplace and in the league. Invitations would also be extended to all coaching staffs through the position coaches. And this would be because we would have guest speakers and guest speaker sessions at the diversity conference, which would be beneficial to anyone in the league to learn about. And then the third piece, aligning with networking, is the invitation to minority candidates in the league, analysts, and aspiring coaches who are looking to move up in the coaching staff. And for them, it would provide an opportunity for networking with these upper level executives that will be in attendance, as well as the opportunity to get a match for our championship program to create a sponsor and help us better utilize that program. So to talk about the specifics of that championship program, I'm going to pass things off to Megan.
Thank you, Anna. As she mentioned, the next piece of our recommendation is the implementation of our championship program. So we recognize that you already have a mentorship program in place. However, it is only structured to last a year, whereas this cycle is much more intimate as it covers multiple stages of its members' careers and their endeavors rather than just being a short advising period. The first piece, sponsorship, is where members sponsor minority candidates by promoting their achievements through the interview process. Like Sarah mentioned, the new piece of the Rooney Rule helps eligible candidates get their foot in the door, but the sponsorship piece allows for career and professional advocacy from the very beginning. Next, the mentorship piece would aid individuals in improving their coaching skills, understanding the culture of the NFL and their respective team, and vertically advancing within their career. Finally, the championship, or the last piece of our cycle, helps establish an informal culture where ideas and leadership skills are promoted by the mentor and mentee both, like idea allyship and integrity. So to show how the championship program directly will work with our use case, I'll pass it back off to Sarah.
Thank you, Megan. Drawing back to our use case, once in an assistant offensive coordinator position, Saquon now attends the diversity conference. Here he meets Coach Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. After this opportunity to network with Kellen, Saquon begins earning trust and identifies a career sponsor. Kellen advocates for Saquon by bringing him to networking events and connecting him with other offensive coordinators. Kellen invests in Saquon's career success, and as Saquon progresses through the early stages of his career, Kellen serves as his mentor, helping him to advance in the program, excel his coaching skills, and understand the leadership culture of the NFL. Finally, now it is Saquon's voice that is being heard in the championship program. As Saquon builds leadership qualities and has impactful ideas for the upper levels of the NFL ranks, Kellen champions his ideas with integrity by leveraging his position in the NFL to continue pulling Saquon up with merit. In return, Kellen receives recognition and personal leadership growth while Saquon has an ally and continued upward movement. Once in a position of power, Saquon now feeds back into the cycle, using his upward movement to sponsor another minority candidate's upward movement, so more candidates like Saquon are set up for their worth to be valued by higher levels of the NFL organization. Now I'll pass it back over to Kyle to continue with the implementation of the hiring process.
Thanks, Sarah. So now we're going to take a look at some of the changes to the hiring process that are going to create a more equitable environment for minority candidates. The first of these is an implementation of a hiring scorecard. A league-sanctioned hiring scorecard provides a league standard on which to grade candidates and guide teams to the correct decision. The NFL Diversity Committee selected each of the following 7 categories to include: trust level, perceived risk, previous coaching success, career experience, their prior relationship with the coaching staff, where the candidate was referred from, and ultimately how all of these factors compare to other candidates. You'll notice that none of these categories provide a specific boost to minority candidates, but rather they are intended to keep everyone on a level playing field. Some categories, specifically the relationship and referral categories, tie in directly with the advantages provided by the championship program that Megan and Sarah were just talking about. However, the scorecard would be entirely useless if it wasn't accompanied by some kind of enforcement mechanism. That's why we're also implementing league oversight for all interviews through the NFL Diversity Committee. Interviews will be recorded, sent to the league, and scored using the same scorecard. If the league notices a team making decisions that frequently differ from their own, they can launch an investigation or conversation into that team and their hiring process to figure out where the disparity is between why they're selecting more white candidates than people of color, or just in general, why they're not necessarily abiding by the same standards that are generally abided by. So now I'm going to pass it back to Sarah to explain how this ties into our use case.
Thank you, Kyle. So at this point, Saquon has developed the network and the skills to go for an interview that would move him up from the assistant offensive coordinator to offensive coordinator position. Having a standardized scorecard levels the playing field for Saquon and adds objectivity to how he is viewed as a candidate as he prepares for these interviews that would move him up the ladder. With a system of checks and balances in place, Saquon is not discriminated against in the hiring process. As a result, Saquon receives the offensive coordinator position for the upcoming season, thus successfully moving up the NFL chain of leadership. I'll now hand it over to Kayla to explain the steps of our solution and begin our solution analysis.
Thank you, Sarah. So as you can see here, we created a timeline for implementation. So we intend for this to be done in less than a year, starting today, by planning the diversity conference, which will be held in August prior to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Concurrently, we will inform the NFL coaches and staff of the championship program, pairing them with their mentees following the diversity conference. And because the scorecard is already created, we will work on finalizing it and implementing it again before the 2023 hiring cycle. So after implementation, we will be monitoring these positions 5, 10, and 15 years down the line to see if this funneling approach is operating as anticipated. And if it is, we will continue to use this process. And if not, we will make adjustments and continue to monitor the results moving forward. So now I'd like to pass it off to Anna to discuss the legal and financial implications of implementing our recommendation.
Thank you, Kayla. So as Kayla mentioned at the beginning, and I mentioned when discussing the Rooney Rule, the racial inequalities in the NFL have been reignited and brought back into the spotlight because of the Brian Flores, former head coach of the Miami Dolphins, lawsuit against the NFL alleging this racial discrimination in the league's hiring practices. This was earlier this year in February. And then in March, the NFL, announced the update to the Rooney Rule, which mandates the hiring, as we've mentioned, of a minority offensive assistant coach. So in accordance with the legal aspects of this case, the three pieces of our solution, the diversity conference, the championship program, and the hiring process changes, align with the current Rooney Rule requirements, as well as addressing Flores's and others' concerns regarding racial discrimination in the league. Utilizing our recommendations will help to improve the NFL's current practices, as well as avoiding potential future lawsuits in this area. On the financial end of things, we can see that there are both costs and benefits with our solution. The cost sides relate to having the NFL interview oversight review costs, conference costs, and the championship program incentives, which amount to $9.6 million costs within a year. However, when we look at the savings side, we can see that by avoiding future lawsuit payouts within a year, we save $167 million, as well as having higher viewership and ticket sales saves $304 million. We've seen in the past when the NFL has had these racial issues arise and be in the press, that viewership tends to dip and doesn't always return to where it was at before. So by avoiding having these racial inequalities in the news, we continue to gain and maintain viewership and save money on ticket sales and viewership via TV. All of this amounts in a net savings per year of $461.4 million. So we've established that our solution is legally and financially sound, but it's important to remember that you called us in specifically to remember and align your ethics. So to reiterate that and to close things out, I'm going to pass things back to Sarah.
Thank you, Anna. As we can see through the solution implementation process, the NFL has started to put initiatives into place to improve the environment of diversity. But we have three major pieces to fill the gaps and make sure that this implementation will stick for the long term and make an ethical impact. The 2022 Rooney Rule update gets minority candidates foot in the door and mandates that all teams have hire an assistant offensive coordinator that is a minority. However, with this, we need follow through. So once candidates are in these entry-level positions, we've proposed the Diversity Education Conference to allow networking opportunities and career sponsorships to form while also combating implicit biases. Then integrating with the existing mentorship program in your early career development, we then have the cycle closing piece of the championship program. And at this stage, minorities in the organization form allies and have mentors who champion their ideas and pull minorities up through the program and can give back in this leadership hierarchy. And finally, we implemented a standardized scorecard interview process with NFL Oversight Committee to increase the integrity and responsibility to the team in the process. Altogether, this builds a sustaining culture that aligns your values with your actions. In an inherently competitive environment, these process changes remind the NFL to focus on what's really important, valuing every member of the team. As a result of these formal changes in culture, we expect to see informal changes in the NFL's culture where leaders give due respect to all members of the organization and promote candidates with integrity to build this culture of leadership and resiliency and excellence for all stakeholders. As a result, the NFL can then embrace its leadership role in society. With an authentic sense of trust, character, and responsibility, the NFL can be the best role model for not only its current coaches and players, but also for the sports community as a whole and the future of the industry. Overall, this realignment allows the NFL to have a broad positive societal impact in all of the sports industry. And that is what the game is all about. Thank you again for connecting with SMAT Consulting, and we will now be happy to take your questions.
Okay, just give a moment here for. Oh, these are all the extra things you would have if we need to see them, the appendix.
Yes, if you would like to see anything in the appendix. Last year, it was taken down before we had the opportunity. So just if there is anything here that you guys would like more information on, we do have it. If not, we can always take down the slide.
Very, very smart. Thank you very much. That was a very informative piece, and I think you've given the committee and Roger a lot to think about. What I'd like to do is my fellow members of the committee will have some questions for you, and we'll spend about 20 minutes on those. And let's just, shall I just turn it over to whichever member of the committee would like to speak first? Thomas,
this is Tom. Thank you for an excellent presentation. As an owner of the team and a member of the committee, I want to thank you for your insights. And I'm sitting here and listening to it, I would say that we really have a lot in common in some things that perhaps we don't agree with. But one of the things that struck me was early on, you mentioned that we have an upset public. That kind of made me think of it because our TV ratings are up. All of the indicators says we're doing a good job. We had the largest watched Super Bowl in the history last year. So that would knock me back a little bit with an upset public. I mean, certainly there may be some disgruntled folks, but they're validating us with their eyes in their pocketbook. Secondly, I'd say that we're moving in the right direction. You know, as an organization, the NFL is almost 100 years old. We reflect society as a whole. And I might be the only guy in the room that can remember back in the day when Doug Williams was the first Black quarterback for the Washington Redskins and led them to a Super Bowl performance. So while you may disagree with the pace of our change, I think we're moving in the right direction. Don't forget, though, that we are a performance-based entertainment company. The things that drive us are profits and championships. That's what we're all about. It's entertainment and profits. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And I want to, lastly, in this session, give you an example of how far we've come. This past year, Super Bowl head coach Bruce Arians decided to retire. But before he did, he named his one of his coordinators as head coach. He knew this guy, the example that you gave earlier, well, I know candidate B, we played together. Arians made this guy the head coach without a lot of hoopla. He just said, this is the guy, he's my man, and let's go with it. So I would say to the folks, our consultant group, that yes, there's room for growth, but I think we're moving aggressively in the right direction, and we want to.
Thank you. Tom, did you have was there a question you'd like to ask, Tom?
No, that's just feedback as with my executive hat on.
Okay. And Tina, did you have some questions?
Well, thank you very much for a very thoughtful and thorough presentation. As I sit here and listen, and I see there have been some lawsuits, I'm wondering what the financial ramifications really are, and how those publicized lawsuits may may relate to other industries. Are the NFL, are we any different than other companies? And so I'm wondering if there are other benchmarks of how other organizations have dealt with this.
Sure, I can start off with that one. Thank you for your question, Tina, and Thomas, thank you for your input as well. There was a lawsuit against the NFL a few years back in 2016 in regards to a disproportionate effect on Black players who had brain injuries and then were not receiving the proper medical payouts in order to help with those. And so that payout in 2016 ended up being $1 billion from the NFL. And so while there has not been a number put on the class action lawsuit by Brian Flores and other coaches who have joined as well, we're benchmarking from that previous case as well as other racial discrimination cases about $1 billion with the size of the NFL and the revenue from the previous year being 12.2 billion. So that was our benchmark for the financials and what the impact would look like. In terms of the other organizations, other sports organizations that we look at, we have determined that the NFL is by and far the largest of any of the sports organizations in terms of revenue, in terms of viewership, in terms of impact. And so one of the things that we did is that every year there is a diversity report released by a third party that looks at all of the major sports organizations. And we found that the NFL, and they assign essentially a grade to each organization. Women's basketball, the WNBA, has A's on both counts of gender equality and racial equality. The NBA also does a pretty good job. However, when we looked at the third party's report on the NFL, we found that the grades were no higher than B minus, and most of them were at C level ratings. So we see that while the NFL is the leader in the sports industry, that they're lagging behind in terms of diversity when evaluated by a third party. So we would like to, in the future, and with what we did with our recommendations, benchmark some of the other leagues that are having more success through utilizing these things like a career sponsorship program, like the championship program that we posited, as well as being more transparent in the hiring process through the use of like a scorecard, as well as recording interviews and NFL oversight. So we have given some thought to that, and we do want the NFL to be the front runner and be playing in the same league in terms of racial and gender equality as the other current sports leagues are.
Very, very helpful. Just for clarification, so the recommendations that you presented, are those modeled off of some of these other sports leagues and things they've done where they have exceeded in having greater diverse representation in the leadership?
Yes, the biggest piece that we benchmarked was the idea of the diversity conference. The NFL actually piloted a similar type of conference back in 2012. They only did it for 1 year, and then it fell off for whatever reason. We couldn't really find what that was, but we see that other leagues hold this type of event, and it helps to create that recognition of diversity within the league. Additionally, the pieces that Kyle discussed in our hiring process are actually things, with the oversight from the NFL as well as the scorecard, are actually things that were posited by the NFL's diversity committee in the most recent 2021 diversity report they released. So they discussed these ideas, but we want to, as Thomas mentioned, take action. It can't just be about talk. So these are ideas that the NFL had created, benchmarking other programs that we then built out in order to help with that increase in equity of promotions once the pool is broadened. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you so much.
And just to add on to what Anna had said as well, in addition to benchmarking other sports leagues, we had also benchmarked businesses and found a way to integrate how businesses are able to promote diversity within their context and integrate it with the sports context that the NFL operates to create the championship program. In this way, we are modeling what Thomas had said before about how the NFL does have an element of profit-driven success, but also has the element of the game and promoting sportsmanship. So being able to create the championship program that creates this cycle where people still feel the sports mentorship, while also being able to be modeled off of a business has been a large benchmark for our program as well.
Terrific, thank you.
Jeff?
Well, how much time do we have? I have a lot of questions. As a team owner, there's just a whole lot of things I wasn't aware of. So let me just start with a bunch of questions. My team is 71% minority. So it sounds to me like I might need a mentoring program for white guys. And it sounds to me like that most of the recommendations that you are describing should maybe be carried out with the teams, because their diversity it's really disproportional. Would you tell me about that first?
Yeah, so Jeff, I can take this one. I mean, obviously the biggest thing that we see at hand is representation in the coaching staff. So that's what our solution is addressing. And one of the biggest things that we found was that diversity within the coaching staff was not as much based on merit as it was based on race, in terms of intuitively you would expect that the same proportions of people who are playing the sport are going to be coaching the sport. Now, in terms of your concerns with the percentages of people of color that are playing the sport, we found that to be a completely separate kind of entity in and of itself, because through the college and professional development programs, those players are getting scored and drafted based on merit rather than the color of their skin. And that's something that we didn't see as exactly a problem. And another thing you mentioned, a mentorship program specifically for the players, that would be much harder to implement, considering all of these players are coming from the college and high school ranks, which are ranks that we have no jurisdiction over. So any initial development on that end would have to be done at that level, compared to the NFL, which is something that we can't cover from the NFL side of things.
Well, Kyle, you kind of shifted gears on me there for a minute. I didn't see that one coming. So your assertion is that the players actually coming up from colleges are hired on their merit, whereas coaches most of the time are not. Do we have evidence that coaches with a meritorious background have had the doors closed on them and have not been allowed to either apply for a job, or they haven't gotten any jobs? I mean, do we have any kind of evidence like that?
Well, Jeff, I think the evidence of that is the millions of dollar lawsuit that we actually have sitting at our table, that we're going to be really struggling to deal with. It has been a massive PR disaster. So on that hand, that's one of the things that if we're completely innocent, then we can wash our hands on that. But from what our internal sources are telling us, we're not completely innocent, and a lot of franchises have made some poor decisions that are putting the NFL in the position that we're in now, which is why we have to take these remedial steps on our end.
And if I could jump in here for just a second to give you a specific example, Jeff, with the most recent lawsuit, it was brought about by Brian Flores, the former head coach for the Miami Dolphins. As I mentioned when I was discussing the Rooney Rule, the reason he brought this case forward was because he was applying for a head coaching position with another program after he was let go from the Dolphins, which came as a shock to him because he had had a winning season with the Dolphins. For the most part, when coaches tend to have an overall winning season, they're not released from their position. So it was clear that Brian Flores was doing a good job with the Dolphins, being successful in his career, and yet he was fired. And additionally, he was paid, or he was offered to be paid by the owner of the Dolphins $100,000 for every game that he lost in order for the Dolphins to have a better position in the draft. So Brian Flores is a perfect example of someone who, very meritful, has had success in the NFL and was let go for a reason undetermined. And when we look at it, and a big basis of his lawsuit is that it's based on the racial discrimination. And so that's a specific example of a situation where a coach who is very meritful was shut out from the opportunity to have a head coaching position because, as I mentioned, when he went to apply for this new position, they had already picked who they wanted as their head coach before they had interviewed Brian Flores, but they were still interviewing him simply to meet the previous Rooney Rule requirement. And he found out about this through a text message from Bill Belichick, congratulating him on receiving the position when Bill mistakenly had meant to text Brian Pohl, who they were giving the position to. And so that is what brought about Brian's case. And again, an example of a meritful coach being disenfranchised from a position that he was qualified for.
Well, Anna, let me follow up on that because in the mid-'70s, the head coach of the Cowboys was fired after winning 2 Super Bowls. Phil Jackson, head of the Bulls, Chicago Bulls, was let go after winning 3 NBA titles, both white, both men. In fact, last year, out of 25, I had to write this down because I always forget this, 27 coaches, 7 were fired. That's almost 25%, all white guys. So, I understand, and in addition to the Flores rule, I could also make the argument, not that I necessarily agree with it, but I can make the argument that the reason the Flores lawsuit came up was because this arbitrary rule was imposed on the NFL requiring people to be hired or interviewed based on their skin color and ethnicity. That sounds to me like it's racist. If we didn't have that particular rule, it seems to me that over time, the NFL would change, as Thomas noted, and we would eventually have more people in coaching. I mean, it's not hard to look that far back and see a time when the NFL was almost completely white. All the players are white, all the coaches were white, everybody was white. And now we have 71% are minorities. We have some minorities moving into lower level coaching positions where later they can move into head coaching jobs. But we are dealing with a rather ruthless entity. Even sometimes when people win, because they don't get along with the owners or because there are other political issues within the organization, they get fired. I don't know that it's good business, but I know they're making a ton of money. So is this a little preemptive? Is this a little heavy-handed for a private business?
Yeah, so Jeff, I think we can get into the implications of the Flores lawsuit all that we want. But that's probably something that makes more sense to get into within the legal proceedings of that case, because there are arguments from all sides on that situation. But the fact is, we have a lawsuit worth hundreds of millions of dollars sitting on our table. That's a situation that we don't want to get ourselves into in the first place. In terms of what you were saying with the Rooney Rule and how it's a mandate for X number of minority candidates getting interviewed, we agree that is something that is difficult to stomach as part of the Rooney Rule. The fact that going in, it's natural that you're going to have assumptions on who you're going to want to hire already based on your previous relationships, based on recommendations, based on the style of your team, things of that nature. That's why that as part of our solution, we didn't really go into making any more mandates as part of our Rooney Rule or as part of our recommendation. We didn't say, all right, you have to interview 2 more people of color as your candidates to increase that pool. That's not what we're doing. What we're trying to do is get in on the base level to fundamentally change how things are operating by expanding that pool from which to hire out of, and then by having more merit in those promotions based on equity rather than kind of the current system that we found, which is that white people are disproportionately promoted compared to people of color.
Well, doesn't the championship program actually breed the familiarity that you're talking about? I mean, if you don't want coaches to hire people that they worked with because they like them or because they worked with them before and they're comfortable with them, it seems to me that a championship program does exactly that.
No, exactly. So we're not trying to get rid of that. In fact, if you look at our hiring scorecard, you could see that 2 of the categories are one of which is where that candidate is referred from, and another one is that candidate's previous experience with the coaching staff. However, we find that people of color are disproportionately score lower in those categories because they don't have those experiences and connections that many of the white candidates do. In fact, a lot of the white candidates we have found are actually relatives of previous coaches. So they don't even have to forge relationships. They kind of just genuinely evolve through being a part of the system with their parents and all of those things. So it's all interconnected, and that's what we're really trying to do, is not exactly put people of color up on a pedestal, be like, oh, you have to hire this person, you have to do that. We're trying to create opportunity so that everybody is able to most effectively participate in these systems that we have together.
Yes, and
Thank
this is
you.
a
I'm
major-
going to need to, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say that this is a major point of where the issue is that we are trying to create more opportunity for people and not shut anyone out in this culture. We're trying to create a more transparent, open culture so that we don't run into issues such as the Brian Flores case and such as imposing different types of quotas. We're trying to actually integrate all of the races so that everyone feels comfortable within the organization to speak their mind, advance in the organization. And that's a core value of the NFL, respect for people, giving them the opportunity to be heard and to be able to move up through their network and be open within their network in the NFL. So having that is a really important part to tie back into how we actually framed this solution. It's not that we are putting anyone above each other, it's that we're giving everyone the opportunity to be heard in this different situation.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everybody. We have reached our 20-minute limit on questions. And so now we can back away from our roles. You can back away from your roles, your students again, and we are regular people again. And we would like to give you some feedback that possibly you could use in thinking about your 10-minute presentation, your 90-second presentation, and just maybe some feedback in general from a bunch of old people that have been around forever. We'll tell you some things that you might want to take forward. So let's start out. Tina, would you like to give any feedback?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say good job. I mean, kudos to you. You were all incredibly poised, articulate. You distributed who spoke and took different roles. So kudos to you. This is hard to do, especially as a video in this format. And I'm just so impressed by your poise and professionalism. Well done. I think, you know, the one thing with this issue, and I may not have articulated it well with my question as a committee member, is, you know, I'm struck by the parallels of this issue in just corporate America. In many ways, it is not much different. It's just that there is a lawsuit out there right now, and it has highlighted it and shined a light bright on the NFL. But many corporations deal with this issue, and some of the questions that came up, you all handled them really well and very articulate, and were prepared, really anticipating what kinds of questions you may have as to how you came up with your recommendation. And I think that it is just an issue that many organizations struggle with. You know, to the point of whether you hire someone who is familiar that you know versus hiring someone who is you don't know, and that happens quite a bit. But I think that you all handled this very well and how you presented it.
Thank you, Tina. Tom?
I would echo what Tina said. Extremely well done, well prepared, a very polished boardroom presentation. Outstanding. I've got a couple of things I wrote down that I'd like to share with you. One is about first of all, the championship program. I think that's very creative, out of the box thinking, sustainable over time, So nicely played with that. You mentioned diversity training, mandatory diversity training. Mandatory is not a good word these days. And I would suggest that when you serve it up, rather than say something like mandatory, say we're proposing this, and this is why it's a good thing to do. Here's the cost benefit. This is why it will help us as a company. It may help you as an individual. Just some food for thought. I really like the fact that you did a cost benefit. These things cost money. However, you served it up in terms of a cost avoidance. I'd be interested in knowing what if we did all these things in the NFL? What might we do to enhance revenue, to enhance goodwill, to enhance our image in the community, to promote the brand of the NFL, as opposed to just avoiding legal cases? I think there's got to be a greater benefit. Your use of Saquon Barkley was outstanding. I'm a little bit of a football fan, actually a big football fan, and Barkley is a good individual. He would be, from what little I know, a really good person to put in these developmental programs. The biggest thing for me, and I think where the most bang for the buck will come, is to make the interviews of all the candidates transparent to a committee at the NFL. So they've got a different set of eyes on each one of these candidates to come in. And no longer can people at the local level say, well, he just didn't interview very well. I find that whole thing hard to believe. It's still the old boys network. I coached with this guy years ago. That's the thing that has to be broken. And I think with your suggestion where the interviews are transparent, there's a NFL diversity committee trained eyes to look on this, I think that would be a major step in the right direction. So again, well done, very well done.
Thank you, Tom. Jeff?
Oh, I'm unmuted, okay. I really liked your presentation. I wanted to come after you a little bit because I played football for 12 years. I have friends in the NFL. I have friends who wanted to be in the NFL. And it is extraordinarily political. And it is extraordinarily ruthless in so many ways that have nothing to do with what you do on the field. One of the reasons I tried to kind of like, I don't know, spark a few things to give you an open door, but one of the reasons, at least in my opinion, that so many coaches were fired last year is because they got in through the good old boys network. And they weren't great coaches. Right? That's why they got there. And Kyle, you were right on the cusp there. I thought you were going to step over when you said players coming out of college come in on merit, and they do. It's like horse racing. I mean, they have every stat. They know what this guy's favorite color is before they hire him. But when you get into coaching, it's all about how much do I trust this guy to be able to make me money? How much do I trust this guy with information I don't want everybody else to know? You know, it's all about the network. And it's political, and it overall, it hurts the sport. From a former athlete, I can tell you, we won't even go down that road. I like the idea of the championship program. I think it's a really good idea. I'd like to see it open to everybody, regardless of your racial or minority status. I think it could even potentially open the door for women coming in, not only as referees, but potentially later as coaches and assistant coaches. I think that was a great idea. And I also like that you followed up with, because on these programs, somebody is going to say, from an ethics perspective, you're putting an awful lot on skin color. You know, you're making comments like because we're more diverse, we're not going to have the same kind of discrimination we had before. We won't have the same kind of ruthless activity we had before. We'll be more ethical. None of that's true, right? So that's one of the things I think that somebody's going to come at you at. So I wanted to see how you'd handle it when they did. And I thought your reaffirmation of, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about merit. We're talking about other things. I think it was great. It was spot on. Difficult question, by the way, to handle. So I think you did really well there. What else? I had one of the things too that I wanted to just kind of bring up really quick. the mission and core values, I think tying it in with that was really good. I have my reservations about whether anybody in the NFL at that level really has a set of core values, but that's my own personal that's my own personal issue. So again, kudos. I think you did a good job with a tough topic, one that's been bounced around by everybody from sports writers to people sitting down in the pub. So good. Again, good job.
Thank you, Jeff. As I said at the outset, I've worked with Penn State on a number of presentations before, and if they set the bar very high, you can go back and tell them that you met that, because I think that you did just a great Penn State job. That we're always very impressed when Penn State comes to town. One thing that I would suggest to you, and this is something in your future presentations as well, when you look at your audience, how you define your audience, what assumptions do you want to make about your audience? An important question to ask is, what is going to be of most interest to them? And use that to grab them at the very beginning. In this case, as the judges had mentioned to you, professional football is all about money. And what I found myself doing as a committee member is just, all right, when are they going to get to the money? When are they going to get to the money? When are they going to get to the money? And you could have addressed that up front. You wouldn't have to take everything in your presentation and move it, but you could just hint at it up front and say that our plans will also help reduce money or reduce costs, increase revenues. Now you've got my interest. It's like, okay, this isn't just some kind of touchy-feely woo-woo sort of thing. They have considered the fact that there's money involved here. Now you've got my attention as an owner. So just keep that in mind. How do you grab your audience and build your credibility at the very beginning? I love the fact that you all spoke so professionally. I always have to remind myself that this is an undergrad division, because I taught only graduate school, and I can tell you that your level of analysis and your delivery is graduate school level. So definitely, you should be impressed with yourself that way. You did look into the camera. It's amazing how many people in other divisions can't quite seem to do that, and it makes a very big difference to us as an audience. If you continue doing that on Zoom, knock wood, we won't be on Zoom too much longer, but to the extent that you are, the eye contact piece is very important. I agree with the things you heard. I will leave the qualitative feedback to my three colleagues here. I thought that was excellent. And what I will do then is just ask you, what is it can we clarify anything for you, team? Is there any questions you have for us? Anything that you're concerned about for tomorrow's 10-minute and 90-second? Anything we can do for you?
I have a question. So in terms of, tomorrow we're doing the presentations that are strictly based on ethics. Jeff, you had mentioned that you liked the mission and the core values. Is there anything specific that you thought was particularly strong in the presentation in terms of ethics that you think we should really try to push tomorrow when we're presenting?
Well, I guess, one of the things that I like is that the underlying theme in a lot of your dialogue was one of equity. And, equity doesn't always mean, the same. It means removing barriers and not creating others. And you kind of got to that later on, but you only have 10 minutes. So I think I would hit that really quickly, that you're not talking about creating barriers for other people. And some of the old white guys, like myself, that's the first thing they think of because they're scared. But that's not really the issue. I would go with equity. I would lean on the fact that the hiring process is not transparent and it's not qualitative. So it leaves too much open to subjection, even though people might see themselves as being completely fair and open-minded. Unless you have a scorecard to go back to, or unless you have a process that's been documented and quantified, it's very difficult to either prove that or self-assess that. And I can tell you, as someone who's hired a lot of people, there are times when I've gone back and taken another look at somebody I wanted to maybe not call in for an interview and had to double check what I was basing that on. And there have been times when I changed my mind, had somebody come back, they ended up being great candidates, but without that support group around me to double check, I would have probably missed it. So even if somebody's trying hard, they still have implicit bias. Having that type of scorecard that you guys, that you talked about can be really beneficial that way. Those are the main things that kind of came across to me. I think Tina's got something for you.
Well, I was just going to maybe add on to that in some of the discussion that has ensued, in that the point was made that when players come out of college, they're retained based on merit, and maybe building on that and thinking about equity, that as you look at coaching staff, that's based on merit and equity as well. They're looking at someone's performance and how good they're going to do in the job. And that would tie back to the values.
Anything else, team, before we adjourn? Well, I'm lucky because I get to see you tomorrow. You're not so lucky. You got to see me, but I get to see you tomorrow on the 92nd, and I'm just looking here and saying, "Whoa, this is a tough division," because all three schools are really good in the 92nd. But I'm sure you're going to be fantastic. What I just want to say is, it's just a pleasure working with you, and we learn from you, and that's part of IBEC, is that we all want to learn from each other. This is not meant to be a grilling, pushing you up against the wall sort of thing. This is an opportunity for everybody to share and for everybody to learn. So I hope that you have enjoyed yourself thus far. You're only 1/3 done, but it's just a pleasure to have you once again, Penn State, being here at IBEC. And so thank you for your great presentation today. And we will adjourn now. And our judges will be filling out the evaluation forms on their own. And we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
So
everybody.
Jim, what you're saying is they're going to fill out a scorecard.
That's right. That's right. We have our own scorecard. Maybe we'll edit it for next year to be a little more in line with the championship model. But yes.
And our names on it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Good luck tomorrow.